Sigh of relief after it was feared that cuts could range in the thousands. But what about civilian jobs? Joining us from our Washington, D.C. bureau now to talk more about this is Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Congresswoman, welcome back to Capitol Tonight.
Happy to be back, Liz.
So I know this is a big victory for you. You and a number of other members of the delegation have been lobbying very hard to prevent deep cuts to Fort Drum, and it looks like you were successful, at least in the short term.
This was an incredible victory for the Fort Drum community and, frankly, the New York State community. I led the effort on behalf of the New York delegation to work with the Pentagon to prepare for the listening session in March. The community really poured out in support. Fort Drum could have faced upwards of 16,000 in troop reductions, and to get the news today that we are only losing 28 is just a huge sigh of relief. Many other military installations across the country have thousands of cuts, so it's a great day for Fort Drum.
Do we know more about the civilian side of things? I mean, we're talking about the single site, the largest single site employer in the state with almost 4,000 civilian personnel. Now, the military personnel is upwards of 17,000, so it's a big jump there.
Absolutely. So it's the hugest economic driver, the most significant economic driver, certainly in my district, but it is the largest single site employer. As of today, the Army announced the active duty cuts in terms of the 28, and in the next coming weeks and coming months, we'll hear more about the civilian cuts.
Is it logical to assume that since or safe, I would say, since the military side are so small that then subsequently the civilian cuts will be small, or is that not safe because they need to make up the difference somewhere?
That is my hope, is that any of the potential cuts will basically be parallel to the very few cuts that we faced on the Army and military side. So my hope is the cuts will be insignificant, close to nothing, and I think that makes sense in terms of the role Fort Drum plays in today's Army. The 10th Mountain Division is the most deployed unit in the U.S. Army, so we need to have that support system from those civilian jobs.
This is, as I mentioned, a big victory. Do you think it helped that your predecessor, and several predecessors ago I should point out, but former Congressman John McHugh is the Secretary of the Army. He did represent this district, and he did say he has a soft spot in his heart for Fort Drum, though of course there is a stark reality, which is of course that the military is downsizing.
I think it is always helpful to have Secretary McHugh in his position. He represented this district tremendously. He knows how special Fort Drum is. He's from Watertown, and he, I think, always has an eye looking out for Fort Drum and our military families there. So it certainly has helped. I've worked to build a relationship with Secretary McHugh in his capacity as Secretary of the Army. I've met with him during frequent events on Capitol Hill. I'm part of the Army Caucus, also serving on the Armed Services Committee. There were a number of opportunities to ask him questions when he was testifying before Congress, but I certainly think it helps to have a friend of Fort Drum as the Secretary of the Army.
Right, and we do know that he's poised to retire, so we're not exactly certain what will happen, next. And part of the problem is that these cuts, and as you mentioned, other installations across the country were not nearly as lucky as Fort Drum. If these multiplied by, I think, about to the tune of 30,000 in additional if the sequestration cuts go forward and Congress doesn't act. So it's not as if we're completely, off the edge, although for now we can breathe easier. What is it that you think Congress will be able to do to stave those off?
I think the President needs to work with Congress on addressing defense sequestration. The defense sequester is gutting our nation's military, and particularly if you look around the world today with the rise of ISIS, with increasing Russian aggression, we need to make sure that we're not gutting our national security and we're not playing politics. Sequestration was proposed by this White House. It was signed into law by this President, but it was voted on in a previous Congress. So since my first day here, I've been fighting to roll back sequestration, to get rid of the defense sequester, but also to educate my colleagues, many of whom do not have military installations in their district, about why this is so important for our national security. Our representatives from the Army, the leaders of the Army, have talked about how this is going to devastate our military readiness. But this fight is not over. But make no mistake, Liz, this is an incredible day for the Fort Drum community, and it's a real testament to the support that we have within the community in Jefferson County and, frankly, the entire North Country.
Right. Do you think that that message is being heard by your colleagues? I mean, there isn't a fantastic track record in terms of bipartisanship, in terms of lifting sequestration cuts. I mean, it is true a previous Congress did approve this. That said, many of the former Congress members are continuing to serve.
I definitely think that there is a likelihood that we will come to a compromise on this issue and try to tackle the defense sequester, because it's quite interesting as ISIS continues to gather headlines, not for good reasons around the world today. I think members of Congress are recognizing national security as an incredibly important issue. And frankly, the threats are increasing around the world today, so we should not be making these devastating cuts to our military at such a time. So even though I've been in Congress for 6 months, I have noticed a difference in my colleagues' appetite to really try to tackle this issue, and we just need to continue working hard on a bipartisan basis on the House Armed Services Committee to educate our colleagues so that we can come to a solution, hopefully in the next, by the end of this year.
Yeah, I do want to ask you before I let you go. We spoke not too terribly long ago with your 2014 Democratic opponent, Aaron Wolf. He's not going to seek a rematch, as you already know. But we do know that someone else has stepped up. His name is Mike Derrick, and he is a retired Army colonel. And I think part of his strategy is trying to rally the Fort Drum community to his side as he seeks to challenge you in 2016. Obviously, as you mentioned, you're having some success in Fort Drum. You're serving on a number of committees that are related to the military. But does that concern you, his background, that would be challenging? It's a challenging district, understood, in the way that it is divided.
I'm focused on doing my job, and I think that my record leading on behalf of Fort Drum really speaks for itself. Let's not take away from the good news that we have as a broader community today. I worked hard to get my committee assignments. I'm the only freshman serving on the Conference Committee for the National Defense Authorization Act. It's the most important national defense bill that we will pass this Congress, and as the sole freshman voice, I've been elevated to a leadership position. I'm working hard to make sure that my campaign promises have been kept, and I'm working hard on behalf of this district. And as you know, Liz, I got in the race very early. I spent a lot of shoe leather traveling this district, and I've worked hard to earn the support, and I'm continuing to do so. We launched our mobile district office just last week. We're visiting all parts of the district, and I continue to keep a very rigorous schedule, getting back as much as possible. Making sure that I'm accessible, transparent, and one of the, hopefully, the hardest working member of Congress.
Well, Congresswoman, we will be seeing more of you, I'm sure, and particularly as the campaign gets a little closer. But congratulations on this good news. Congratulations to the 21st Congressional District. It is a significant piece of news. Thank you.
Thanks, Liz.
Still